We want to start today with a number, and we want you to sit with it for a second before we move on.
$1.7 trillion.
$1.7 trillion. That is the current total outstanding student loan debt in the United States. It is larger than the entire GDP of most countries on Earth. It is carried by approximately 45 million Americans, many of whom are still paying it off well into their 30s, 40s, and 50s.
And the vast majority of those people took on that debt because someone they trusted, a parent, a teacher, a guidance counselor, a culture, told them that a college degree was always worth it, that the investment would pay off, that there was no safer, smarter path to a stable financial future.
And for a lot of people, that was true. For a lot of degrees, at a lot of institutions, in a lot of fields, the math genuinely works, and college is absolutely the right decision.
But for a lot of other people, in a lot of other degrees, at a lot of other institutions, carrying a lot of other debt loads, the math does not work, and nobody ran the numbers with them before they signed the loan papers at 18 years old.
And that is what today is about. Not telling anyone not to go to college, not saying higher education has no value, but doing the math, actually running the numbers, looking at this decision the way you would look at any major financial investment, because that is exactly what it is.
Because here is the uncomfortable truth. When a 17 or 18-year-old chooses a college and a major and takes on student debt to pay for it, they are making one of the largest financial decisions of their entire life, often the largest, frequently larger than buying a car, sometimes larger than buying a home.
And yet, we make that decision with almost no financial analysis. We make it based on prestige, on passion, on where our friends are going, on rankings in a magazine, on the brochure that showed up in the mail with the beautiful campus photos.
We would never buy a house that way. We would never invest our retirement savings that way, but we routinely commit to $100,000 of debt that way, and the consequences follow people for decades.
So let's actually do the math. Let's look at this like an investment, because the framework for evaluating a college degree as a financial decision is actually not complicated. There are really three numbers that matter.
What does it cost? What does it return? And how long until you break even?
Let's start with cost, because this is where a lot of people are working with badly outdated information, often inherited directly from their parents' experience.
The average annual cost of a 4-year public university in the United States today, including tuition, fees, room and board, is approximately $30,000 per year. For a private university, that number is closer to $55,000 per year.
Over 4 years, that is $120,000 for a public university and $220,000 for a private one, before interest, before the fact that a significant percentage of students take 5 or 6 years to graduate, not 4.
And most students do not pay for this out of pocket, obviously. They borrow it, which means that $120,000 public university education, financed at current federal student loan interest rates over a standard 10-year repayment plan, might actually cost you $160,000 or $170,000 by the time it is paid off.
And that is before the opportunity cost, which is the most important number in this entire calculation, and the one that almost nobody factors in.
Explain opportunity cost here because it is crucial.
Opportunity cost is what you give up by choosing one path over another. When you spend 4 years in college, you are not just spending tuition money, you are also forgoing 4 years of full-time income, 4 years of career experience, 4 years of skill development, 4 years of 401k contributions and investment compounding.
So if you would have earned $40,000 a year working full-time instead of attending college, that is $160,000 of income you did not earn over 4 years. Income that even partially invested would have started compounding immediately.
Add that to the cost of tuition, and suddenly the true financial cost of a 4-year degree is not $120,000. It's closer to $250,000 or $300,000 when you account for everything you spent and everything you did not earn.
Which does not mean it is not worth it. For many degrees, it absolutely is worth it, and then some. But the number has to be honest. You are not making a $120,000 decision. You are making a $250,000 decision, and it deserves that level of analysis.
Okay, so now the return side. Because the justification for that investment is always the same. A degree leads to higher lifetime earnings, and that is statistically true in aggregate.
On average, across all degrees and all fields, college graduates do earn significantly more over their lifetimes than people without degrees. The data on that is consistent and real.
But here is the problem with that statistic. It's an average. And it's an average that includes neurosurgeons and corporate lawyers and engineers, people whose degrees have extraordinarily high financial returns. And that average pulls the number up dramatically for everyone.
When you look at median earnings by specific degree, Not the average of all degrees, but the actual typical outcome for each field. The picture becomes much more complicated. Let's run some real numbers, because this is where the math gets genuinely important. The median starting salary for a computer science degree is around $75,000 to $80,000. For nursing, it's around $60,000 to $65,000. For accounting, around $55,000. For mechanical engineering, around $70,000. Now compare those to some other common degrees. The median starting salary for a psychology degree, and psychology is one of the most common majors in the country, is around $38,000. For a fine arts degree, around $35,000. For a general humanities degree, around $40,000. For an education degree, around $42,000.
Now take that psychology graduate with $120,000 in debt, earning $38,000 a year. After taxes, they are taking home somewhere around $28,000 to $30,000. Their minimum loan payment on that debt is probably around $1,200 to $1,500 a month.
Which is roughly half of their monthly take-home pay, going to loan repayment every single month for 10 years.
That is not a manageable situation. That is a financial trap that shapes every decision a person makes for a decade, where they can live, where they can save, where they can invest, where they can afford to have children, where they can take career risks or start a business.
And the tragedy is that the person who took on that debt was not reckless. They were not irresponsible. They followed the advice they were given by every authority in their life. They just never saw the math.
There is a rule of thumb that some financial advisors use, and we think it's genuinely useful. Your total student loan debt at graduation should not exceed your expected starting salary in your first year.
So if you are going into nursing and your expected starting salary is $60,000, borrowing $60,000 or less in total is a reasonable bet. The math works. You can pay it off in a reasonable time frame and still build a financial life.
But if you are going into social work, where the median starting salary is around $36,000, and you are borrowing $120,000 to do it, the math does not work. It does not work regardless of how much you love the field, regardless of how important the work is. The math is simply broken.
And this brings up something that makes this conversation genuinely difficult, because we are not just talking about financial decisions. We are talking about passions, about callings, about people who want to do work that matters, work that often does not pay well precisely because it matters so much.
And we don't want to be the voices saying that only high-paying careers are worth pursuing. That would be a shallow and ultimately damaging message. The world needs teachers and social workers and artists and counselors. The problem is not choosing those paths. The problem is financing those paths with debt loads that were designed for different outcomes.
Which leads to the alternatives, because this conversation is not just about whether to go to college. It's about how to get where you want to go without destroying your financial life in the process.
Let's talk about some paths that genuinely work and are dramatically undervalued in our culture.
Community college first. 2 years at a community college followed by transferring to a 4-year institution. The degree you graduate with says the 4-year institution's name. The cost is a fraction. Community college typically runs $3,000 to $5,000 a year in tuition. You save $60,000 to $80,000 in the first 2 years alone, and the degree on your resume is identical.
More employers than you might think don't ask or care where you spent your first 2 years. What they see is the degree from the institution you transferred to. And increasingly, what they care about even more than that is what you can actually do.
Which brings us to skills-based education. Coding boot camps, professional certifications, trade apprenticeships, online credentials from platforms that major employers now recognize and actively recruit from.
The trade conversation especially needs to happen more openly, because the stigma around trades is both culturally persistent and financially bizarre. A licensed electrician in most major markets earns $80,000 to $100,000 a year or more. A plumber with their own business regularly earns 6 figures. An HVAC technician is essentially recession-proof.
And here is the financial comparison that stops people in their tracks. An electrician who completes a 4 or 5 year apprenticeship, getting while learning, versus a person who spends 4 years getting a business degree at a private university. Day one of their respective careers, the electrician has 0 debt and 4 years of professional experience. The business graduate has $200,000 in debt and an entry-level job paying $50,000.
Who is ahead financially? Without question, definitively the electrician, for at least the first decade of their career, possibly longer.
And this is not an argument against education. Apprenticeships are education. Certifications are education. The question is not whether to keep learning. The question is whether the specific credential you are pursuing justifies its specific cost.
Let's talk about the institutions themselves for a minute, because there is a prestige hierarchy in American higher education that is deeply embedded in our culture, and the financial reality of that hierarchy deserves scrutiny.
The assumption is that a degree from a more prestigious institution leads to meaningfully better outcomes, and for a narrow set of highly specific career paths, investment banking, certain consulting firms, some law and medical school admissions, there is genuine evidence for this. But for the vast majority of careers and the vast majority of graduates, the prestige premium is much smaller than the cost premium. A computer science degree from a state university and a computer science degree from a prestigious private university produce graduates who are competing for the same jobs at the same salary bands. One of them has $200,000 in debt and the other has $60,000. The credential is not 4 times more valuable.
There is also the question of what happens when things go sideways, because not every college plan unfolds the way it was drawn up at 18. People change their major, people drop out before finishing, people graduate into a weak job market for their field. People take the wrong degree at the wrong time.
The person with $60,000 in debt who changes direction has options. They can pivot. They can take a lower-paying opportunity while they figure things out. They can go back to school for something different. The debt is heavy but not crushing.
The person with $200,000 in debt who changes direction is essentially trapped. Every career decision they make for the next 15 years has to be filtered through the question of whether it generates enough income to service that debt. The debt narrows your life.
So what is the right framework for making this decision? Because we don't want to just tear down the conventional wisdom without offering something to replace it.
Here is how we would think about it. If you are considering college, or if you have a young